Hello, Mr. Mack-Poole here. So today I am going to present a video which goes through the examiner advice for 2N, which is the Russian Revolution. Now, the examiner advice from AQA is not actually given wholly from that paper, but essentially the skills is the same. So we're looking at the skills that you need to assess source value. So an example type of question is, with reference to these sources and your understanding of the historical context, assess the value of these three sources to a historian studying the impact of Lenin's economic policy, NEP. Or, you could give certain years and times of a certain event. Okay, it could be anything within the Russian Revolution course. Now, the main advice that the examiners give is that you need to have, as you can see, impressive knowledge, and less able students, they spend far too much time focusing on the contextual knowledge without linking it to these sources. The most effective answers were able to link the provenance of the sources and the sources to the content and relate this to value. Okay, so always got to come back to value. Now remember, the question is asking about the value, okay, of these three sources. So it's very, very important to always come back to that. Now, going down here, okay, we can see I've obviously put in bold there the provenance and context. Okay, so as in previous years, one of the notable characteristics were the length of answers by comparison to the two essay questions, with the source questions simply being as long as the two essay questions put together. Some students chose to leave the sources question till last, and this often made for a more tightly focused response. I think they basically liked that, those tightly focused responses, that maybe they were easier to mark, and it made students really think, what do I need to write in order to get these marks? This year was notable for more formulaic answers, suggesting that students are being taught to examine the provenance and context systematically before making a decision on value. Whilst this is not the most elegant approach, it ensured that many responses did enough to make a level 3, which means that you're kind of guaranteed a C grade, if at least on that question, if you follow that response. So most students, here's another piece of advice. Most students found that all three sources were accessible and were able to investigate both provenance and the content in order to assess value. The more successful students were able to explicitly link the provenance to value, rather than making bland and general comments on reliability or timing. So, instead of writing, this is a memoir, therefore, memories fade and blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's not very, very useful to a historian or an expert historian. So the more successful answers considered what was meant by value. So this is interesting, isn't it? Okay. Some less effective answers claim, somewhat simplistically, that propaganda lacks value, thereby equating value with accuracy and truth or reliability. So we know that value, there can be a value on propaganda. It doesn't mean it's true. So, for instance, Stalin used a lot of nationalistic propaganda during the Great Patriotic War. He didn't use a lot of Bolshevik propaganda. He wasn't like, defend the proletariat, defend the dictatorship of the proletariat, or defend collectivization. He used more nationalistic memories from the days of the Russian Empire. So that's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that he used that type of propaganda that's quite revealing to a historian. Now, here we go. This is quite interesting. So the least effective answers misread the final part of the source, okay? And thought that Sherman was arguing that victory is due to brute force. This highlights the importance of carefully reading the sources. Who would think it's important to carefully read the sources? Formulaic answers referring to provenance and content did occasionally lose content and value. So you've always got to come back to value, okay? If you analyze the provenance, why does that have value? If you analyze the tone, why does that have value? If you analyze the content, why does it have value? Always come back to value. The most effective answers focus on evaluating value and brought in provenance, tone, and content supported with contextual knowledge to reach appropriate judgments. Okay, that's good, isn't it? That's the kind of answer you need to write. Here's a real little short one. Okay, most students are able to make very sensible comments about this source, with more able students able to recognize both the value and limitations and provenance of the source. Okay, now let's see what this examiner is saying in bold. Most students dealt with the provenance of each source first before moving on to an evaluation of the content. This approach worked well as long as the students had fully read and understood the content of the source before starting to write. This is necessary to fully appreciate the context of the source and to avoid making generalized stock comments on the provenance which have no relation to the source's specific origin, purpose, or content. Again, in bold here. The most effective answers considered each source in turn and combined some meaningful evaluation of the provenance with that of source content to show how the source might be used as evidence by a historian wishing to know more about X, Y, and Z. Okay. Now, moving on. Okay. Now, again, this is not about the Russian Revolution. It doesn't matter. It's about the exam skills. So, higher ability students use precise contextual knowledge and understanding to question the source beyond summary of X, Y, and Z. So, as you can see, precise contextual knowledge is going to help you get good grades if you link it to the value of a source. Okay, now, moving on. So, the mark scheme really kind of awards grades for analysing everything, again, with the value in mind. So, the provenance, the nature of the source. Is it a memoir? Is it a diary? Is it a piece of propaganda? Is it a memorandum? Is it a telegraph? You know, what kind of is the nature of the source? Origin, who wrote it? Is it Stalin? Well, very useful. Dictator of the Soviet Union from 1928 to 1953. You know, one of Lenin's most trusted advisors until he fell out with him. So that's obviously a very important person, very significant person to analyze. Was it Trotsky? Was it Kamenev, Zinoviev, Tomsky? Was it Ribbentrop? Was it a German ambassador? Okay, so don't think everyone's going to be Russian. They might throw you a curveball and have a sort. And it could be Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill spent time with Stalin during the Cold War or the negotiations, the Big Three conferences. So interesting times. Okay, so make sure that you analyze the tone. Okay, is it a tone of propaganda, anger, sadness, desperation? What's the tone? Why is that useful? How does it help you understand that time period more? What's the emphasis of the source? What's the content? What's actually been written? And what arguments are being made? Okay, but all along, always come back to source value. Okay, always come back to source value. Don't forget to read the source. That's important. Okay, don't just panic and skim read. Read it deeply, highlight, annotate. Okay, and don't forget that not all diaries and official sources have tremendous value. Not all propaganda is without value. Think about why sources have value. Okay, really think about that. Why is this valuable to a historian? And the examiner wants nuance. Carefully balance why your sources have value. Okay, so carefully balance that. And on that note, I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to upload this to your to my YouTube channel, and you can watch this. And this should help you write your responses. Now, remember, just fine. This is not an essay. You don't need an introduction. You don't need a conclusion. You need to write a similar amount for each source that you analyze and come to a mini conclusion at the end for each source. But don't come to an overall conclusion for all sources. As I said, it's not an essay. It's an analysis of source value. And keep your timings nice and tight. No more than 1 hour on this question. Okay, thank you and goodbye.